Brian McGinnis here, Chair of the Finance Committee meeting, along with my colleagues Brian Travis and Nicole Shimoni. We're beginning the meeting at 7:19 p.m. Eastern Time on January the 8th. And are there any announcements? Seeing none, any comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda? Let's move to reports, the director's monthly financials.
Good evening. If we could start with page 2, please. So looking at the cash position report for December 31st, 2024, we started the month with $24,500,515 in cash. We booked $2,490,406 in receipts. We spent or transferred between funds $2,742,008, and this left us with an ending cash balance across all funds, restricted and operating, $24,257,113. Moving over to the summary of results on pages 3 through 8. I'll just go through this summary quickly. So for the year ended December 31st, the general fund booked a net income of $354,601. Looking at the results by department, recreation, police, IT, and public works are all service-oriented departments, so their revenues that are allocated do not support their expenses, so they always operate at a net loss. The police department, their overtime budget was overspent by $140,000. This is partially offset by this special event fee, which is booked in recreation, as well as overtime reimbursements that's booked under code 36235 in the police department. Salary expense is also overspent by $53,000, the majority of it going for the payout that was paid to the former chief back in January of last year. Moving over to the housing department, there were 2 areas in their revenues that did not meet budget. Land development did not meet budget by $26,000. Rental permits did not meet budget by $44,000. On the expense side, consultants expense was over budget by $19,000, and land development was over budget by $18,000. Moving over to IT, overall expenses were under budget. Moving to the Public Works Department, overall, while their expenses were under budget, they did have some line items that were over. Street openings revenue did not meet budget by $48,000. Overtime was overspent by $31,000. Utilities was overspent by $52,000. Consultants by $16,000. Damage-related repairs by $26,000, and vehicle repair by $45,000. Moving over to the administration department, the department posted a net income of $14,467,995 for the year. The following revenue line items beat budget. EIT beat budget by $161,000, D-transfer by $32,000, local services tax by $24,000, interest income by $222,000, state aid by $73,000, and certification fees by $66,000. On the expense side, capital expense was over budget by $187,000, utilities by $38,000, and administration by $33,000. Moving over to the fire fund, the fund posted a net income for the year of $198,927. The sewer fund posted a net income of $1,722,788. Revenues that were booked were better than budget by $1.1 million. Professional fees were overspent by $60,000. Utilities were overspent by $37,000. The sewer relining project had $130,000 left in the budget. That project was not completed, and there was $168,000 left in the capital line items. Moving over to the parking fund, the fund posted a net income of $528,610. Parking ticket revenues was $283,000 better than budget. Meter revenues was $91,000 better than budget. Parking garage revenue did not meet budget by $110,000, and parking lot rentals did not meet budget by $59,000. On the expense side, overtime was overspent by $27,000, bank fees by $16,000, utilities by $34,000, and software enforcement by $21,000. And then finally, the stream protection fund posted a net income of $790,813. There was $360,000 in capital projects that were not completed, as well as $241,000 in stormwater maintenance. Again, these results that you have before you tonight are cash basis, so we're only booking money coming in and money coming out. There's no accruals for any timing. So these results are going to vary to the report that the auditors report in June or July of this year. And we did not make any considerations for any accruals in any, salaries or accounts receivable, accounts payable, or depreciation, or anything of that nature. Are there any questions?
I do have a couple, and then I'll open it up. One with the banking fees. Are we going to be able to look at other banks that maybe have lower fees?
So those are not necessarily fees for keeping the money in banks. They're more the credit card processing fees. So every time you swipe your card at the meter or, the kiosks or any of that nature.
The other thing is, how much do we have in our reserve?
So you mean by fund or the big capital operating
The
reserve?
big capital operating reserve.
So the capital operating reserve has about $8.7 million in it currently.
Thank you. And I did pose this to both you and Mr. Metric regarding yields and going after yields. Has there been any update on any type of plan to look at maybe CDs that maybe have a higher yield moving out?
That was something that I was going to focus my attention on kind of in the new year, which is now. So that's something I'm going to look into. My first thought was to look into Pliget. I know they have pretty good rates because that's where we did a lot of our earnings this year. So I thought I would start there and then branch out to any banks.
Thank you.
Is your view on that, Brian, that it's likely that interest rates will be cut in 2025, so it would be a good time to lock in longer term?
It would be, right? And I think we already saw a rate cut recently. Okay, so you're starting to see these yields come down a little bit. But if there's something that we could look at a longer term CDs, maybe roughly 5%, and just again, get a little bit more yield than we would normally get through the state fund.
What are terms that you're seeing available that we should be
I
targeting?
mean, from what I saw, like up to a year, but those are going to vary from bank to bank. Any other questions on the dais?
Yeah, what is the interest rate on our Pliget accounts or investment trusts? Like if we were to compare that to a money rate right now?
The last time, I haven't looked recently, but they're
We-
roughly around
we
like
can add it,
5%. But
which
might
is
be a little
about
bit,
where we
yeah.
would see in a money
We-
rate too.
I
But
think
you
they're gonna be
can-
lower
you
than
can
5.
you can structure it in different ways. They have class, which is basically your typical bank account, and then you can put it into, they have prime and CDs and different ways, like different structures. So forgive me for not knowing.
Sean might have
exact
that.
rate.
I had the benefit of a computer, so the
Maybe.
Pliget current 7-day yield for Pliget class shares is 4.25%, and Pliget Prime is a little north of 4.5%.
Yeah, I mean, that's roughly where money markets are at right now. Any further questions? Any public comment? Well, and then Ann, and then Bernie.
Ann Carroll, 506 South Franklin Street. I had addressed this question to Barb and got a response from Mr. Metric, but I'm still not fully clear on this. Under the Public Works commentary, there was a note about services, professional consulting services for Yerkes. And Yerkes is generally used by building and housing and zoning. And I did not, I read thoroughly and I responded to Mr. Metrick's response. It seemed that he was saying that you all had agreed to charge, you all meaning council, had agreed to charge the Yerkes that belong to Building and Housing to Public Works for the convenience of a line item. And I question that as to whether that would be correct. So I'm seeking clarification. Did we really do that? And if we did, that to me would be unauthentic, to say the least. And an auditor should have a problem with things not being in the right line item. And indeed, it makes it questionable as to whether our budget, even if we had to make a budget modification in order to absorb that and change money from one department to another to allow that to fit into the budget, that happens all the time. Budget mods are approved. So I just want to be clear that we're doing things correctly.
So let me, because there was a lot of conversation about this that I watched last night too. So as a former auditor, I got my CPA when I was younger and I actually audited places. So I also have a perspective on this. I forget if he told us exactly, probably, and we were like, okay, because I think Sean's perspective was we did not have a consultant bucket in the building and housing department. This is like $20,000, so an immaterial amount, if you will, right? It's not a huge amount. We didn't have a consulting line item in the building and housing budget. So for transparency's sake on knowing that we paid consultants for this amount of money for things, the thought was put it in Public Works where we have a place to put consultant fees. So we know we at least spent it on consultants and it doesn't get buried in some kind of other line item. And then we're like, what did we spend this on, right? So it gave visibility that way. So the visibility, yes, it went over there and visibility in building and housing kind of went away if you looked at it straightforwardly, but it gave more visibility because it did show that there was consultant fees that we paid versus some kind of other. And then the idea was that it would be corrected in the 2025 so that the visibility that was there. But if you're an auditor and you're coming in, again, you'd be able to get the information if you were curious. I don't know how closely our auditors look. And I think, I hear your concern. Technically, yes, you are correct. Technically, for this amount of money, if you wanted to be exact to the dollar, yes, we should. And I think everybody agreed last night that it's going to get moved and they're going to create a new line item and do all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I hope you don't walk away from here thinking that there was any nefarious actions, any shadiness going on here. I think the idea was that Sean was actually trying to account for it most transparently, or as best transparently with the tools that he had at the time when the decision was made, knowing that it was this amount of money. So
Thank you. That's clearer. I do still object. And I'm asking this as a question because I forget. Would you not have been able, I don't know who to address this question to, would you not have been able to, when the circumstance occurred, which I presume was in like April or May, when we had to hire Yerkes, if I recall, that's when he kind of showed up. But couldn't you have created a new line item, or could it not have been put under other expenses and then had a note that would have been appropriately putting it in the right department? Because it was not a public works expense. It was a building and housing expense. And fixing it this year for all of the accounting that goes on this year is one thing. But having a good historical, correct record of where expenses were and why, I think is extremely important. And as I said, we did budget mods all the time. Could that not have been done? Could you not have added a line or put it under other expenses? And if you could, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. If you could have done that, my commentary is, I think you should have, because I don't think any department's costs should ever be attributed to a different department. So I thank you for listening to my concerns. And thanks for the explanation.
That was the first question I was going to follow up on, because Mr. Metrick promised the committee that by tonight that Ms. Leone would have a answer to council about transferring from Public Works, the 21,000, over to building and housing, the money. I agree with you, and I agreed with Mr. Metrick when he mentioned last night he had nowhere to put it. But it doesn't take that long to make a line item. And if you had to do a budget modification, like I mentioned last night, Mr. Metrick agreed, we could have not had this conversation. So I don't know whether it's been fixed. Barb, did you fix it yet? Or did Mr. Metrick give you the instructions to fix it?
Yeah, so I did create a journal entry that is in Mr. Metrick's review file.
So Tuesday, hopefully Mr. Metrick can report to us that the money's back where it belongs. The second reason I wanted to talk to you.
Well,
is-
hold on. I think for that first one. do you-
Yeah, just to clarify what a journal entry is. And there's phrases being used where the money is and put it over here, move it over here. The money is spent. The money's in TCA, Tom Committed Associates, and Yerke's bank accounts. And so it got booked. It's on the books as an expenditure. A journal entry is just simply taking the record of that expenditure and recoding it to a different general ledger line item, saying, hey, that cash didn't flow from this expense account. Take it out of here and dump it into this other expense account. So we do journal entries all the time as part of our review processes. So that's what's happening. I just want to be clear. Cash isn't
No,
moving anywhere.
we know.
The cash is
yeah.
cash is
The
in
bills-
someone else's
It's the
account.
bills that were charged of the wrong code and to the wrong department. Because in order to know exactly what building and housing is costing us, we need to know what it's costing us. For example, the third-party inspection, the Yerkes, and all the other expenses that were occurring that we never had to occur before when we had a building inspector and a zoning officer in one. Now we're spending more money in that department, and it's good to know where it's going. So the reason why I asked to stand up is the previous meeting, the rental permits. Looking over the numbers of dollars for rental permits. I just conferred with Barb, and Sally was going to ask her and report back to us on Tuesday. But in 2023, we still have $32,000 still not collected in rental permits. Is that the right number, Barb? Close enough? 30,000, okay? And in 2024, we have 44,000. So that's 76, let's see, whatever it is, 76,000. Anyway, of our money, our operating money, that we're just not doing anything about the collect. My suggestion, council in November gave the Building and Housing Department permission to hire part-time or temporary staff to work through the situations. They've gotten all the checks in. They were sitting in a box. They've gotten all the checks cashed. We still haven't sent out the second notice to people because we don't know who paid or who didn't pay. At $76,000, I think we can hire a temporary person to come in and focus just on the $76,000 and be done with it when it's done. We're behind on 2,000 inspections. Things just aren't getting done, but the $76,000 tweaked my attention. And Brian's worried about 4.5%, talking about 4.5% in the money market and stuff like that. That's $70,000 just sitting on the street that we're not collecting.
Sean, do we have a plan for that? I mean, what is the plan? Has Sally, formulated anything?
So Yeah, it's a collections process. It's someone following up, notifying the rentor, the rental license applicant that they need to apply, that they need to pay for the license that they didn't pay for, or follow up and get their rental license for renewed. So it's a manual process of making sure that the people who need rental licenses have them and paid for them. This year's budget number was $246,000 of rental permits at around $44 per permit. Can't do that math quick enough, sorry. We've collected $202,000 cash basis as of 12/31. So we have to determine two things. It was $246,000, the right expected amount of money. And it should be in the ballpark because your budgets should be pretty close to your expectations. And we then have to book that as treat that on the books as money that we expect to get within a reasonable amount of time in the next year. So we go after it hard now and in the first 60 days of 2025 to get the cash into the borough's coffers. And that would get booked then as an accounts receivable on your financial statement for 2024, assuming we can get that.
John, is
That
what you're
number
saying is
is
we'll
short.
catch up at some point? We'll catch up and we'll make up for those lost revenues? Or does it reset? In other words, is the 70 and change $1,000, is it in the rearview mirror and it's not collectible at this point and we reset because we're in a new
Well, I
cycle?
don't know what the $70,000 is. I'm just looking at 2024.
Or just starting with the last year's?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2023, we didn't collect 30,000. People just didn't pay their rental permits, okay, or didn't get permits, according to our numbers from the Treasury, okay? And in 2024, it's 44,000 right now.
So
But Bernie, we do have to answer the first question. We got to make sure that the budget number in 2023 was the actual right expected number that we expected to come in from the universe of rental apartments.
yeah, how do we see that? How do we bounce what's still open against, or what we didn't get? Like, how do we know? I'm assuming we have some system when we get the check, we key it into the system that this location paid or something. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
we
Barb
yeah.
will be able
So-
to explain it to
So
you.
we
little
can
bit
run a
more
report
coherently.
that says this location had a rental and didn't pay.
Mhm.
Is that what the 30,000 is?
Well-
This location had a rental and never paid us our
Should be able to move.
amount, and then is there any like duplication? Like, is there one place, or are there a lot of places that just aren't paying? And so 44,000 is actually 30,000 times 2 plus some, you know what I mean?
So what I will say at this point in time is, again, reiterating with Mr. Metric that these are kind of, they're estimates. We do know that there was not second notices sent out for this year. So I think in order to, have a good number in front of you, I think we need to do a little bit of work on our end to see what wasn't followed up on last year, what we can still go after, and make sure that, we can follow through on this year, because I honestly, I would like to do a reconciliation on this before I can say that those are, the final numbers, but they're just not the numbers that we collected. So.
Wait, can I ask just a clarifying question on the collections piece of this? Who's responsible for collecting? You're going to ask the same question? Who is responsible for collecting this in arrears? Is it building and housing?
Yeah, so the bills are sent out by the housing department, and then all of the collections come in. They enter the payments in their SmartGov. I know that's not what it's called anymore. And then there should be a report that's run for unpaid properties, and then they should send second notices out. And then after that, there should be, a final follow-up, whether those can go to citation or not. So I think with, the bills they were sent out late this year, and that was due to staffing within the department. There was a backlog of getting all of the checks deposited. I think it just kind of, it
think
got
this has
too
been a
late by
I
the
hear
end
what
of
you're
the
saying
year.
about this year. I think it's been a problem for years. There are so many cracks in this department and it needs to be fixed. I mean, we're not collecting fine revenue. Everything's taking way too long to get resolved. We're not collecting on, I mean, this is a real systemic problem at this point. We need to have this addressed. I don't know where we would bring this up again in discussion, but it's got to be a priority for the
Might
beginning
be.
of this year.
Yeah, I was going to say Smart Growth
Okay.
Committee. I think that, first of all, thank you for bringing, and you have a follow-up. Do you guys have any follow-up?
Just, Ann Carroll, oh my God, that there is in our ordinance a penalty for not having a rental permit. You lose your right to rent. So to me, again, I understand just justification. I understand you got to see who didn't pay, but that should be tracking through the years if there are any kind of good records. If there aren't, you are kind of SOL, but there is a penalty. If you do not pay your arrears immediately within 30 days, whatever, and it's not much. A rental permit is not much. We're talking about $44. That's what I thought I remembered. So if we have 44,000 outstanding, there are 1,000 properties that either changed from rentals or they're thumbing their noses at us because they know we're not doing our job. In terms of what you guys can do, it should be now the focus should be on building and housing and the revenues that are coming in on a monthly basis. And if they're not running at a rate that's going to catch up, you got to do something. But right now, if they don't have a valid rental permit and you go knock on the door and it's still a rental, they've got 30 days to pay up not only what they owe, but their current rental permit. Otherwise, the yellow sticker goes on it. If in law, as you all should know, and I think you do, if there is no enforcement, there is no compliance other than by good and well-meaning people. And we can't rely on that, particularly in the safety areas, which this is a safety area. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Eyes wide open.
So with that, thank you, Mr. Flynn, and thank you, Barb, for the explanations. Sean, I think that this is probably have to go in the Smart Growth Committee meeting for next month. And, we need to make sure we get this revenue in. $76,000, that could be a difference between a tax increase, potentially next year or whatnot. But more importantly, the safety issue that Ann mentioned, making sure these permits are out there. So let's hope that building and housing within the next month could start picking up the slack. To Mr. Flynn's point about hiring someone, I don't know if that's the answer, but maybe it's a total focus on this project and maybe it's overtime and just getting this done.
But before we bounce it back to smart growth, Barb, is how hard it is it for you to do this bounce by, next week?
If you want it by next week, I'll have it to you by next week. I can put something together. I'll work with Sally and see if we can come up with
That would be great.
by Tuesday, we can.
Yeah,
have
like
a
for
plan.
the work session.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to
To
send that
get
to
a
us,
real understanding.
if you
of-
want to send that to us in the Finance Committee meeting, that way we could have clarification.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions about the report? All right, seeing none, let's move to old business. Approve the December 2024 minutes. Are there any objections?
No.
Any public comment? Item B, discuss impact fees on land development projects. So this is what I brought up last month, in which case I noticed that there are other municipalities in Chester County that do have an impact fee. And after further review and looking at the definition of an impact fee, to me, I look at this as something that the borough should have done maybe years ago. And I'm not sure if it's going to make sense to do it now, based upon how much that would cost the borough to do a study. And Sean, if you want to elaborate on that.
Just need a little bit more time to figure this out in order to put a good cost estimate so we can make a determination on the cost benefit of doing this, because doing a transportation impact fee, I didn't realize how involved it was. And it has to be done to a standard that PennDOT has created. So whenever you get PennDOT involved, a committee has to be established and a transportation improvement plan has to be thought out and designed and to accommodate the new trips that would be generated by new development. And from that simple math, there's a dollar value of those constellation of improvements divided by the amount of expected growth in the municipality. And that is it's kind of like we talked about EDUs last night in Public Works. There is a value per trip that gets generated by the demand of a new land development. And so the developer would pay a fee into the fund to fund the transportation improvements in the plan. That's the basics of how it works. I have some questions about how that works in a municipality like Westchester that is built out, and our transportation improvements aren't going to be road widening. They aren't going to be highway exchanges. They aren't going to be things like that. They're going to be streetscape improvements, intersection improvements, signal improvements. And I got to figure out with Kelly's help from RVE if there is a way to put a plan together and what that would look like before I can advise you on the cost benefit of going further. So I'd like another month to think about it.
There we go. I'm fine with that explanation. Any further comments on the dais?
I think my only comment would be if we're looking for a source of revenue, the better way of going about this will probably be the way we've been doing it with grants versus charging fees through new land development. It seems like that's been working out fairly well with us for streetscapes and such. So we would just continue to pursue that instead of this.
No, I'm in agreement. As I stated, I think this is something the borough is 10 years behind on. Let's move to new business here. I'm going to read off these motion to approve the purchasing request, Atlantic Heavy Duty for $313,045.02. That's a rear loader for a trash recycling truck, of which $200,000 from the DEP grant will assist with that funding. Civic Plus for $12,420. That's the agenda meeting management that we discussed in the ACT committee. Grancius, $19,256. That's the third of 4 borough payments and that's for permitting and licensing system. OpenGov, that's $28,614.96. That's software. I believe that's what you use, Mr. Fink. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is the asset management system for public works and wastewater. Thank you for the clarification. USALCO, $12,540, phosphorus removal. And finally, Lewis Environmental, that's $11,473.75. So that was a spill that happened over the holidays that we used Lewis Environmental to help clean up. Are there any comments about these motions to approve these purchasing requests from the dais? Is there any public comment? Is there any objection to any of these requests being made? Okay, seeing none, so we can move that as approved. Is there any other business tonight? Seeing none, we can motion to adjourn at 7:53.